At the registry office, I heard my mom say quietly, right after the signing, "We're all moving into her apartment." She has no idea. Please stay with me as I tell you my story, and don't forget to support our channel by subscribing, liking, and sharing with your loved ones. I stood there in that tiny registry office in downtown Ohio, holding a small bouquet that trembled almost as much as my hands. My dress was simple, nothing fancy, but it was mine, bought with my own money after years of saving. I tried to look calm, but inside I felt something sharp crack open when I heard my mom whisper those words. She didn't know I heard her. She didn't know I had been listening for weeks, sensing something was wrong. But the real punch to the stomach came when I looked over at Jason, my fiancé, the man I thought I was about to build a life with. He smirked. Not a sweet smile. A knowing smirk. The kind that confirmed what I already feared. He knew all along. He wasn't marrying me. He was marrying the convenience I offered. A fully paid-off apartment. Stability. Someone who had always been trained to say yes. My apartment wasn't much. 2 small bedrooms, thin walls, old flooring, and a view of a parking lot that wasn't impressive at all. But it was mine. I bought it after years of juggling shifts, skipping meals, and crying over bills I never showed anyone. Every piece of furniture had a story. Every corner held a memory of how hard I worked to stand on my own. And now my family thought they could just move in as if I owed them another lifetime of sacrifice. I tested it gently, asking Mom what the plan was after the ceremony. She slipped immediately, talking about finally having a real home again, and how we'd figure out the sleeping arrangements once we settle in. We. Not me. Not Jason. The whole family. Like my place was some community shelter they were entitled to. It hurt more than I expected. A deep, familiar hurt I had carried since childhood. But I didn't show it. I kept my face calm, kept breathing, kept pretending I didn't know. I needed to see how far they were willing to go. How much they truly believed I existed only to fix their problems, fund their mistakes, and give up every dream just to keep them comfortable. Jason stood beside me, adjusting his tie like he wasn't part of the scheme. I watched him with new eyes, remembering every moment he pushed me to add his name to the deed, every comment about how my parents just needed a little time, every guilt trip disguised as concern. I felt something inside me shift, something cold, steady, and stronger than the fear that had held me all my life. When the registrar finally called my name to sign, I lifted the pen slowly. And for the first time in years, I wasn't scared. I wasn't confused. I wasn't obedient. I had one clear thought in my mind. If they think I'm their doormat today, they aren't ready for who I'm about to become. The night before the wedding, I sat alone in my apartment, letting the quiet settle around me. The place wasn't fancy, but every item inside it came from years of pushing through long shifts and learning to depend on myself. As I looked around, memories I had tried to ignore started coming back, one after another, like someone had finally switched on a light in a dark room. Growing up, life never felt steady. My mom could turn any small issue into a dramatic storm, and my dad floated from one plan to the next without ever landing on something solid. My brother Tyler was treated like the pride of the family. He was the one who got praise, support, and second chances. I was the responsible one, which really meant I was the one expected to fix whatever fell apart. The first time I realized how different our roles were was when my college fund disappeared. I had been saving for years, dreaming of leaving our hometown. But after one of my dad's business attempts collapsed, my parents claimed they had no choice but to use my fund. I was still a teenager, and instead of being angry, I felt guilty, like helping them was the correct thing to do. They told me we were a team, and I believed it. By high school, I was juggling 2 part-time jobs. It wasn't for spending money or fun. It was to keep the lights on, buy groceries, and cover whatever bill showed up unexpectedly. Whenever I questioned why I had to work so much, I was told I should be proud to support the family. College wasn't much different. I signed up for my first credit card thinking it would help me buy books and necessities. I didn't find out until years later that the card had been used regularly without my knowledge. My parents never mentioned it, and the debt sat quietly growing under my name. As I got older and started earning more, it was like every extra dollar I made already had a destination. A doctor's visit, a broken car part, a school expense for Tyler, an unpaid fee from one of Dad's projects. There was always something urgent. I didn't even question it anymore. I moved from one payment to the next because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. The only decision I made completely on my own was buying this apartment. It was small, plain, and not in a popular area, but it was safe and peaceful. When I signed the papers, I promised myself this place would stay mine. No one else would control it. No one else would decide who got to live here or how it should be used. That evening, as I tried to prepare for my wedding, my phone rang. My mom's voice was cheerful, but something in her tone made me sit up straighter. She called the apartment our place, as if she already belonged here. She didn't ask. She didn't check. She spoke like it was already decided. That single phrase stayed in my mind long after I ended the call. It was the first clear sign that something about tomorrow wasn't what it seemed. And deep down, I knew that whisper was only the beginning. Right after I heard my mom whisper her plan, Jason stood next to me adjusting his tie like he was too important to be in a small registry office. He muttered that the place looked cheap, and for a moment, his voice faded into the background. I just watched him and wondered how I ever convinced myself that this man cared for me more than what I could provide. I met Jason at a corporate networking event. He had a way of talking that made people feel like he understood them. He joked about growing up with very little and talked about wanting stability and a peaceful life. At the time, it sounded honest. I didn't realize how much those words actually meant to him. Little by little, he slid smoothly into my family's world. My dad liked that Jason could help him prepare business pitches and talk confidently to clients. Tyler saw him as a friend who always had time for drinks or games. And my mom couldn't stop praising him. She told anyone who would listen that Jason had drive, that he would lead this family to a better future. I didn't understand then that by family, she wasn't talking about the two of us, she meant all of them. As things got more serious, Jason began bringing up my apartment more often. Not in a sweet way. He insisted it would be easier if his name was added for paperwork. He claimed couples shared everything, and that keeping the place solely under my name was weird. When I didn't agree instantly, he acted disappointed, as if I was being unfair. He also pushed the idea that my parents living with us for a while was normal. He said good children helped their families, and he repeated that phrase often, almost word for word the way my mom used it whenever she wanted something. When I hesitated, he turned cold. He once asked me if I was trying to abandon my parents. That choice of words stung deeply, because it was the same type of guilt I grew up hearing. There were small things too, moments I brushed off. Times he talked about my income with too much interest, or how he got strangely quiet when I mentioned saving for the future. I ignored those signs because I wanted to believe that he loved me, not what I could offer. Standing in the registry office that day, watching him grin at my mom's joke about my apartment, something inside me finally connected. He didn't look surprised or uncomfortable. He looked amused. He was standing with them, not with me. In that instant, it became painfully clear that Jason wasn't pushed into anything. He wasn't clueless. He was part of the plan from the beginning, comfortable with the idea of stepping into a life where everything I had built would become his and my family's. I felt anger rise in my chest, but I kept my face still. I didn't want anyone to see what I was thinking. I just took a slow breath and made myself a silent promise. If Jason had chosen their side, then I would choose mine, and I would do it carefully, without rushing, and without letting any of them suspect what was coming. A week before the wedding, I opened a letter that instantly made my stomach drop. It mentioned an updated property record, with something called a temporary family authorization. I didn't understand the wording, but it sounded like someone was trying to attach my family to my address in some official way. That was enough to send me straight to the nearest law office without even finishing my coffee. The office was small and quiet, nothing fancy, but the man who greeted me immediately made me feel like I was in the right place. His name was Elliot Ward. He looked calm, collected, and focused in a way that made me want to tell him everything. I handed him the letter, hoping it was some kind of mistake, but the look on his face told me it wasn't a simple mix-up. Elliot explained that someone had tried filing a document that would give them the right to act as if they were part of my household. Not a rental agreement, not a request, an authority form. He showed me where it had been rejected. The only reason it didn't go through was because my signature was missing. Without saying names, I already knew who tried it. When he confirmed it was filed by Rhonda, my chest tightened. My own mother had tried to slide herself into legal control of my home. Elliot didn't rush me. He asked gentle questions, giving me space to gather my thoughts. For the first time, I said out loud things I had been avoiding for years. How my accounts were often drained without warning. How my parents always seemed to know my financial situation before I even processed it myself. how I had once handed over small bits of access because I thought it was normal to trust your family. He asked if he could check my credit history with my permission, and I agreed. Within minutes, he found patterns that made my heart beat faster. Transfers regularly moved from my account to one in my dad's name. And there was a deeper issue. Everything was tied to a power of attorney form I had signed when I was 19, after an accident. I remembered signing it quickly because I needed someone to handle my paperwork while I was recovering. I didn't know it could still be used. I didn't know it covered so much. Elliot pointed out a small detail I had never noticed. I could revoke it whenever I wanted. I didn't need to explain myself. I didn't need permission. But he warned me that doing so would expose every hidden thing at once. There would be no pretending after that. Then he told me something I didn't expect. My grandmother, Eleanor, had left me investments that were still active. They weren't huge, but they were solid. They were in my name, yet my parents were handling them as if they were their own. I sat there stunned, realizing my family had kept this from me while letting me struggle, worry, and work myself to exhaustion. Elliot placed the revocation document in front of me with a pen. My hand didn't shake this time. Signing that paper felt like breathing after being underwater for years. When I finished, he looked at me and said calmly, "If they react badly, you won't face it alone." For the first time in a long time, I felt the ground shift under my feet. Not from fear, but from finally taking control. The evening before the wedding didn't look anything like the calm, happy moment I once imagined. Instead, I sat in Elliot's office with papers spread across his desk, trying to steady my breathing while he guided me through every step. It felt like we were rebuilding my life piece by piece, correcting things I didn't even know had gone wrong. We started with the most important task, making sure no one else had legal power over my finances or my home. Elliot had already prepared the forms to cancel every previous authorization my parents had. With each signature, I felt a small weight lift off me. It wasn't dramatic, but it was real, like turning keys in locks that no one else could open again. Once that was done, we moved on to my accounts. Elliot asked me to list anything my family might still use. And as I went through them, I realized how many small doors I had left open over the years without thinking. He helped me close the shared credit card that Tyler treated like free money. I transferred my savings into an entirely new account under stricter privacy settings, leaving only a basic amount in the old one, so it didn't raise suspicion immediately. It felt strange to secure my own money, but at the same time, it felt necessary. Then we looked at my apartment. Elliot made sure the deed reflected only my name, with extra notes that protected it from anyone claiming shared access. He drafted a letter for the building manager, explaining clearly that I was the only resident and that no keys should be given to anyone else. He also added instructions about visitors, making sure there would be no excuses or misunderstandings. It was the first time my home felt truly mine on paper. To be safe, we called a moving company and asked them to be ready the next day. If my family tried bringing their belongings into my apartment while I was at the ceremony, the movers would pack everything and take it straight to storage. It was a quiet safety net, one my parents wouldn't see coming. As the planning continued, something inside me stirred, an old memory, sharp and still painful. I remembered the internship I once dreamed about, the one out of state that could have changed my entire path. My parents convinced me not to go. They said they needed help, that it was selfish to leave. I gave in because I didn't want to disappoint them. Sitting in Elliot's office, I realized how many steps of my future had been taken from me in similar ways. This wasn't only about money or documents. It was about years of being steered away from chances I earned. Years of being told to shrink myself so they could feel comfortable. By the time we finished, the weight on my shoulders felt different, not lighter but steadier. I wasn't running anymore. I wasn't confused. I knew what needed to happen. I didn't cancel the wedding. I didn't confront anyone early. I decided I would walk into that registry office and let everyone see the truth at once. The place they thought would trap me was going to be the place I finally freed myself. The registrar looked at me, pen poised, asking if I agreed to the marriage. Jason stood beside me, smiling like he was proud, and I caught my family's eyes on me, all expectant, all convinced I would say yes. My mom whispered again, "We'll move in tonight," and Jason gave a small nod. That tiny motion confirmed what I already feared. None of them thought I had a choice. I took a slow breath and lifted my head. Calmly, I said, "I can't sign." The words felt heavy but right. This wasn't about nerves. It was about refusing to be treated like property, about not marrying a man who saw me as a package deal, someone to provide a home and funds while he benefited from my labor and care. The room froze. Guests exchanged awkward glances, unsure what to do. My mother stood, voice rising, accusing me of being ungrateful, claiming I was humiliating them in front of everyone after all their sacrifices. I didn't flinch. I had rehearsed this moment silently for weeks, and now I was ready. I spoke clearly, calmly, explaining the hidden truths. I told them about the financial control that had dictated my life, the ways they had manipulated my money, and the quiet plan to claim my apartment as their own. I mentioned the old power of attorney they had misused for years and the way Jason had supported them, trying to make me feel guilty for wanting boundaries. Every detail was laid out simply, without anger, but firmly enough that no one could ignore it. Then I revealed the steps I had taken. All powers of attorney were canceled. The accounts they once accessed were frozen. My apartment was legally protected, officially and undeniably mine. I also included Jason in the explanation, describing how he had tried to pressure me to add his name to the deed, proving his loyalty to them rather than me. The room grew quieter, the tension so thick you could almost touch it. I stood there for a moment, letting the truth sink in for everyone. They shifted, whispered, tried to save face, but there was no quick recovery. I realized how much I had feared this confrontation, yet it felt right to claim my space, my money, and my life in front of the people who had assumed control over it for so long. Without another word, I stepped back from the table, leaving the pen untouched. My family stared, their expressions a mix of shock and disbelief. Jason looked dumbfounded, caught between confusion and frustration. I walked toward the door, steady and purposeful, knowing that I had finally made a clear choice. For the first time, I left a room on my own terms, not giving in to guilt, manipulation, or expectation. The whispers followed me, but I felt a quiet strength settle inside. This was my moment, not theirs. My life, my decisions, my rules. I wasn't just saying no to a signature. I was saying yes to myself. That afternoon, I returned to my apartment with Elliot, knowing my parents had probably arrived early to surprise me by moving in their things while I was at the registry office. The moment we pulled up, it was obvious. Their car was parked haphazardly, the trunk left open, and a few neighbors were peeking out of their doors, clearly curious about the commotion. I unlocked my door with the new keys and stepped inside. My eyes landed on boxes scattered across the living room, half unpacked and labeled. Mom's clothes, Dad's paperwork, Tyler's stuff. They hadn't even bothered to hide anything. They assumed I would welcome their intrusion without question. For a moment, I simply stared at the chaos, letting the reality sink in. I dialed the moving company Elliot had arranged, and within minutes, uniformed movers arrived, ready to handle every single box. As they began lifting and packing, Rhonda and Mark came rushing up the stairs, voices loud and accusatory, demanding to know what was happening. They were flustered, unprepared for the reality that their plans were about to be undone. I addressed them calmly, though my heart pounded. I explained that they were trespassing, that they had no legal right to occupy my home, and that all items they had brought would be moved to storage. If they wanted them back, they could retrieve them only after paying the fees. My voice was steady, leaving no room for argument, even as they tried to protest. Tyler's voice broke through the tension, shouting that I couldn't treat my own family like this. I let him speak for a moment, then I spoke, releasing years of bottled frustration. I recounted every late night I had worked to cover bills while they spent freely, every time I went without so they could have what they wanted, every opportunity one had postponed for their comfort. I spoke without yelling, but with enough intensity that the weight of my words hung in the room. The movers continued efficiently, lifting boxes and stacking them neatly for transport. My parents were powerless, their frustration growing as they realized I wasn't backing down. I watched their faces, noting the surprise, the discomfort, and finally, the understanding that their assumptions about me were entirely wrong. Once the last box was loaded, I walked to the door, feeling the apartment finally belonged to me. My hands were slightly shaky, but steady enough to engage the deadbolt. I turned it slowly, hearing the lock click into place. For the first time in years, I felt the security I had fought for. This space, my home, was no longer a playground for my family's control or a place to manipulate me. It was mine completely, with boundaries I had established and the authority to enforce them. As I stood there, looking around the empty apartment, A quiet sense of relief and power washed over me. I had reclaimed what was rightfully mine, and no one could take it away. A few days later, I sat in Elliot's office, a thick envelope resting on the desk between us. Inside were documents I hadn't expected, detailing investments my grandmother, Eleanor Cole, had left for me. As Elliot began explaining, I realized this was bigger than I imagined. Not only did I control her investment portfolio now, but she had also quietly granted me majority shares in Mark's company. Until then, my parents had acted as if they were the sole owners, using my shares to secure loans and make business decisions without ever asking. I leaned back in my chair, stunned. Years of being kept in the dark, of thinking I had no real power, suddenly shifted. The company my father ran poorly, taking reckless risks and ignoring warnings, was now legally mine. Every board member, every creditor, every employee would have to acknowledge me as the majority shareholder. The weight of the responsibility was heavy, but it was also empowering. Elliot reminded me that for years my parents had used me as a shield. When the company succeeded, they took all the credit. When things went wrong, they hid behind my legal ownership to protect themselves. I felt a mix of anger and clarity. All those times I had been pushed aside or made to feel powerless suddenly had a legal and financial counterweight. I stared at the documents for a long while, thinking about my grandmother. She was the only person who had ever told me I deserved more than a life of compromises and barely enough. Her foresight had left me a path to claim what was mine. She had trusted that I could stand up when the time came, and now I had to honor that trust. The room was quiet except for the soft hum of the office, and I felt a strange calm settling over me. This wasn't just about taking control of money or a company. It was about reclaiming what had been manipulated from me, proving that I could handle authority responsibly, and protecting the people who depended on the business from my father's reckless habits. I thought about my next steps carefully. I wouldn't rush in blindly. The upcoming emergency board meeting would be my first public move. I would assert my rights as the majority shareholder, but I would also plan to protect employees and preserve the company's reputation. My actions wouldn't be driven by revenge, but by fairness and control. Elliot looked at me, waiting. I took a deep breath, letting the enormity of the situation sink in. For the first time, I understood the full scope of the power I held. Not as a tool for my parents, but as a responsibility I had earned and a legacy left for me. I nodded and agreed to attend the board meeting, ready to step fully into the role that had always been mine. I wasn't saving my parents. I was claiming what was legally and rightfully mine and ensuring the company could survive, even if that meant stripping my father of his unchecked control. It was a new chapter, one where I finally held the reins. The morning of the emergency board meeting, I stepped into the corporate building with a sense of purpose I had never felt before. In the past, I had wandered these halls quietly, overlooked, a shadow among executives, always reminded that I was just Mark's daughter. Today, everything was different. Security greeted me formally, escorting me to the boardroom as Ms. Cole, majority shareholder. The title felt heavy but right. Inside, the room was tense. Executives, some skeptical, some curious, sat around the long table. My father's face was pale, his usual confidence gone, replaced with uncertainty. He had expected to retain control despite the legal documents, but now he had to face the reality that I held the authority. I took a deep breath and began. I spoke calmly, outlining a clear plan to restructure the company. My goal was simple: cut unnecessary spending, safeguard employees from layoffs, and establish responsible financial management. I explained that my father would step away from daily financial decisions, but could remain as an advisor in a limited, non-controlling role. I emphasized transparency, accountability, and long-term stability. Mark immediately protested, claiming I was humiliating him in front of the board. His voice carried years of arrogance and entitlement, expecting to be untouchable. I didn't argue. Instead, I presented the facts. Debts accrued under his direction, risky loans he had authorized, and poor investments that jeopardized the company. A few executives nodded quietly, realizing my approach was logical and fair, not impulsive. After the board meeting ended, I moved to a private conference room where Rhonda was waiting, tears in her eyes. She pleaded for me to remember family ties and not leave them with nothing. I listened carefully, then explained that they were not losing everything. They were being offered a fair chance to live responsibly without relying on me to cover their mistakes. I offered a small rental for 6 months, with strict rules, making it clear that my accounts were off limits and boundaries would be respected. Mark sat silently, visibly shaken, as I outlined the new structure. He had spent years underestimating me, calling me soft, dismissing my abilities. Now, with each signature I presented, I could feel the shift in power. His hand trembled as he signed the documents that finalized my control. The room was quiet except for the faint scratching of pen on paper, a sound I had waited years to hear. For the first time, I felt in full control, not just of the company, but of my own life. The board recognized my authority, my parents had clear boundaries, and employees were protected. I had taken the seat that was always mine, establishing justice, fairness, and security for everyone involved. I left the conference room knowing I had made choices that were right, firm, and empowering. After a long first day as CEO, I returned to my apartment feeling exhausted but strangely free. The weight of years of control, manipulation, and stolen choices felt lighter. I carried takeout in my hands, a small comfort, a reminder that life could be simple and mine to shape. Elliot stopped by with a small box of my grandmother Eleanor's belongings he had recovered from a safety deposit box. Inside were letters, a few trinkets, and a note urging me to stop apologizing for existing and claim the life I deserved. Holding it, I realized that my fight had never been about anger alone. It was about reclaiming my space, my decisions, and my sense of self. I thought about the registry office, the confrontation, and the legal battles. The true victory wasn't in shocking my parents or humiliating them. It was in quietly taking back what they had always tried to control. Every account, every legal document, every boundary I had enforced was a step toward independence. Revenge, I understood, wasn't loud. It was measured, deliberate, and thorough. Later, my phone rang. It was Tyler, my brother. His voice sounded different this time, hesitant, almost human. He apologized, admitting he hadn't understood how much I had carried for the family and acknowledging the burden I had silently borne. I accepted his words, but I made it clear that we would live separate lives, financially and emotionally. Boundaries were necessary, even with family. That night, Rhonda left a small bag on my doormat. Inside were a few old family photos and a short, shaky note. She didn't ask for money or favors. She simply admitted she had acted out of desperation. I read it, tears slipping quietly, and then set it aside in a drawer. I chose forgiveness for my own peace, not as an invitation to return to old patterns. Standing at the window, looking out over the city lights, I felt a deep sense of ownership over my life. I still loved my family in a complicated way, but they no longer dictated my choices. My apartment, my finances, and my career were all mine. I was finally living on my own terms, guided by the values my grandmother had trusted me to uphold. The past had shaped me, but it no longer controlled me. I belonged to myself, to my legacy, and to the life I was building from scratch, free and unafraid. Do you think I did the right thing by standing up to my family and claiming my life, or should I have let them back in? Share your thoughts in the comments and subscribe for more stories like mine.